All right, Dad, as we look back on your life, is there one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self, looking back now from 2023, something that maybe would make your life better in some way?
That's a really good question. This is not only for me, this is for Ezra, because I never had anybody to guide me or tell me which direction to go. Even back in those days, you were supposed to have a high school advisor. No one ever talked to me. I was just out there. And of course, I was adopted, so those people didn't care very much. So everything that I've gained in my life has been on my own. And whether or not it was my upbringing or it was in my genes or whatever the issue was, I went in a certain direction. And this is for Ezra. If I had to start my life all over again, or if I was little Ezra, 2 years old, and what direction am I going to go? Of course, at 2 years old, he has no clue, but there's phases we go through in life. And the first phase is I'm not listening to my parents, or I'm listening to them because they're going to beat the hell out of me. So it's one or the other. So I really think that genes have a lot to do with it, because I was raised with two other kids that weren't related to me, even though I was told they were my cousins, that went completely in a different direction from me, and we were in the same household. So it's pretty hard for me to understand that I would be like them or they would be like me or we'd be like their parents. Actually, it was their grandparents. But in my case, I completely went in an opposite direction. And I ask myself sometimes why? Why did I go that way? But looking back in that first phase, and when you're a kid, I had a hard life, and there was a lot of hurt as I was growing up, and people didn't seem to care about me. So I built a shell, and that shell was a non-social person. I think after I got into sports, and I had sports buddies, but that was about it. The guys I played ball with, that was about it. I didn't have any other social. I got into band, and then I had band buddies, and that kind of opened me up more. And I think it's a natural instinct, and it's in my genes that I was a quiet person in a sense, just like you, just like Darius, my grandson. I won't say your brother's like that. He's pretty outgoing, but I wasn't like that until I got into sports and music, and I got better, but I wasn't the social guy. So I would say to Ezra, if you have shyness, if you don't want to be around people, and that's the way I was, force yourself to do that, because it'll make you a better person. I think it'll round you. It took me for a while to do that, but the military did it. They put me in situations where I didn't have a choice. I had to speak. I had to socialize. I had to, make friends. I had to do it because it was part of my job. So if you start young, and hopefully it seems like Ezra has a different kind of personality, you were very quiet. You were very quiet. But you were open to everybody. You were always a happy kid. You were always laughing, having fun, sometimes too much fun, especially in school. But you were smart. And I used to talk with the teachers all the time about you, and they would tell me that you talked a lot, but you were quiet. And you only talked when they were teaching. But they found out later that you were completing all your assignments much faster than the other kids. You didn't have anything to do. So you just start talking to the other kids. You were always like that. I was never like that. I never talked to the kids. That wasn't a thing that I did. But later on in life, I learned to communicate. So during that first phase, Ezra has to communicate with the people around him. He has to understand what's going on and try to evaluate good, bad, separation of all of that. Sometimes you see these kids get in trouble when they're young. It's because they're led down that path by somebody else. So you have to be very careful who your friends are, who you hang with. Your parents have to watch all of that because you could get in a trap and never be able to get out. My best friend that I grew up with died in prison, but he had problems from the time that I met him, which is about 4th grade. He was always in trouble. He was very smart, but he was always in trouble. He just couldn't stay out of trouble. He got me in trouble. He lied sometimes about me being in a place where I wasn't, and he was there, and he got caught, and he would say that I was with him. So that was kind of the wrong guy to be with, but he lived right next door to me. We were friends, and I got trapped. And like I said, there were several, maybe 3 or 4 times he got me in trouble when I didn't do anything. So that was kind of a lesson that if I could have learned that early, I would have stayed away from him. And I didn't do it. And pretty soon you get the same reputation as the person you're running with. So we kind of split up at junior high, 7th grade. And that was a good thing because I wasn't affiliated with him anymore. So choose your friends wisely. Listen to what the older people are telling you because it's for your own good. It's not that I didn't listen. I had good teachers. I really had good teachers, and they cared about their students, the majority of them. And I thank Pennsylvania for the education I got because when I went in the military, I was far superior in education than most of the kids that were in my flight, the guys that came into service with me. But it was that first phase that was probably the one that really slowed me down. And it was all about communications and dealing with people. So as you're in that first phase and you're young, you're very vulnerable to go in the wrong direction because you like somebody. Sometimes you have to make a good decision and say, well, he's a nice guy, but I'm not going to run around with him. So that would be my first, if I could do it all over again, that would be my first step. I would go back and just look at the people that I ran around with and, the decisions that I made. Because it makes it a little bit harder later when you're trying to dig out of that hole. Being in the military, you don't have a choice. There's people over you. They tell you what to do, how to do it, when to do it. And I learned that lesson, and I became my own man, my own leader. I became a leader, which made a whole bunch of difference in my life. But the first phase is really important. You got to pay attention to your parents, you got to pay attention to the teachers, and you got to watch what's around you because people will take you down. Not all people are bad. Most people are good. But there's that 1 or 2 that could be a problem, so you've got to watch out. The second part of this is when I went to school. I was smart enough to just kind of look at the book and memorize things and not really learn what I was memorizing because the people that raised me had no education. It's not their fault. I don't hold them to that. But if I got a bad grade, they would beat me. That was the only thing that I knew. If I got a C or a D, I would get a beating. Well, I avoided those beatings. So my grades were good. So I worried about that a little bit, but it was about the beatings. It wasn't about the cause or the end result. So what I did was I memorized a lot of stuff, and I would just look at the book the day before the test or even a class before, memorize stuff, go in and pass the test. What did I learn out of all of that? Really not much. Just maybe I was a good person that could remember things, but I didn't learn anything. That was the whole thing. Again, going back to the military, it's kind of what stabilized me, and I started thinking about what's important and what's not important. But this was in phase 2. So here I am in phase 2, and And I'm going through all of this in junior high and high school. I'm doing fine. Everybody thinks everything's okay. It's really not okay, because my focus was not on any result, any ending, any goal. I had none. I was just in school. I was playing sports and going to school, and that was fine. So in phase 2, you've got to look at where you want to be in life when you get to phase 3. So phase 2 is that point where you're in education, and education means a lot. And as you know, how I pressed you about education, and I pressed my other 2 kids, your brother and your sister. They pressed their kids. You're going to press your kid. That's the way it should be. And that's how you advance in life. It's not being a doctor, lawyer, or a pilot on an airplane. It's being about what you want to do in life and be the best at what you do. Now, the Japanese, you're quarter Japanese. The Japanese don't care if you're a janitor, digging a ditch, doctor. You've got to be the sensei. You've got to be the guy that's smart. You got to earn your way up the ladder. Nobody's giving you anything. We don't necessarily do that in the United States, but overseas in some of these countries, that's the way their kids are raised. So for Ezra, education is really important, but you got to start early. You really have to start in phase 1, but phase 1 means that parents have to do that. As I told you before, Trent, your mother used to read to you a lot. That was probably the strongest point in your development, is that she was reading to you when you were less than 2 years old. And you memorized things that she said. I've told you these stories before. We could talk about that later, but this phase 2 is very important. So now here's the parent, and the parent has to be involved in this phase 2 in the education. The child has to be the recipient of what you're trying to teach them. So once they got it, and I'm sure Ezra will, because he's smart already. Once they've got it, all kids are smart. It just depends on, what phase they're in and who's doing what and how they're absorbing all of this. So what they need to do is to buckle down and figure out what they want to do. And at that age, you don't know what you want to do. Even at 18, when you go to college, you don't know what you want to do. But you've got to set a goal in getting to the point where you can make a decision to go any direction you want. You have to be dedicated to the things that you want to do. So if you want to be an author for a comic book, then you should work on communications and be a good writer. You should be a good listener. Everything comes into the center. So in phase 2, you're actually not centered yet. You're kind of on the outside. You're seeing pilots and doctors and lawyers, and you see all these occupations as you're growing up. You see the professional basketball player. How many times do we hear about a kid who wants to be an NBA star and he's 4'3"? I doubt if that happens. But Ezra has to realize that somewhere along the line, he has to make a decision which direction he's going to go. Phase 2, he just needs to be a listener, and he needs to do all the things that are asked of him in his education, especially early education. And that's where Pennsylvania was very good. They taught the basics in math, science, English. All of those were very basic. But you didn't graduate. You didn't go to the next grade unless you understood what was going on at that phase. So Ezra has to do that. He has to pay attention to his teachers and do all of the things he's supposed to do. Now you move on, and you're in junior high, you're in high school. Now you're beginning to figure out, well, maybe this is what I should do. When I was at that age, I really didn't know what I was going to do. At one point, I thought I was going to be a band director, a music teacher. That was kind of my foresight. But I love sports, and I didn't necessarily think that I was going to be a professional player, but it was on my mind. Even when I went in the Air Force, and I played a lot of service ball, and I was on large teams, higher level teams, and so I did very well. And It was always on my mind that I could have done that. But in reality, I'm 6 foot. I was 167 pounds. I didn't have the framework to do that. You know, you've got to be a big, strong kid, especially nowadays. Now, Ezra's going to be a big kid. But I think back, and I think I made the right decisions. When I decided to go into the military, it was going to be a 4-year commitment. Turned out to be a 27-year commitment, and then 23 years as a civilian. So I didn't really want to do that. It just kind of happened. But I was always into education. I always went to school. When all the guys were running around, drinking, having fun, making fun of me going to school, I went to school and I got my education. I ended up with my master's degree, and that wasn't a mistake. It was something that I said to myself I wanted to do. So I don't regret any of that. I just regret that I didn't do it sooner. So I end up as an industrial engineer. Primarily all my work was in real estate. As a real estate officer, I was a housing officer. I was a chief of engineering. I was a deputy chief of engineering in Japan for a numbered Air Force. So I kind of fell into those when I saw that I had an aptitude for it and I was better than everybody else. And it was only because I had a dedication to it. You have to dedicate yourself to what you're doing. So once I got into real estate and I really liked it, I went out of my way to be smarter than everybody else. I spent time at night, in the morning, in the afternoon. It didn't matter. I would study. I would be curious about things. That's what you have to do. So when you're in this second phase and you don't know where you're going, you got to have some sort of dedication, even if it's just basics, math, science, whatever, English. I've learned that the best way to do things is to take on the stuff that you don't like first. The stuff you like, you're going to spend a lot of time on it. But the stuff that you don't like is where you're going to have problems. I guess English was probably one of the things that I didn't like. To this day, a double participle just makes me angry when you say it because I had it stuffed down my throat. But it was for the good. And so you're in this phase 2. There's things you're not going to like. You've got to like them, but you need to understand where you are and where you're going. So even if you haven't got to phase 3, where you're deciding all of these things and what you're going to do in life, and you're not going to be there until you know what's going on in phase 2. So when you're in junior high and high school, you got to pay attention. You got to figure out, where you want to go, but you've got to take the right path. When I was in high school, I took the business curriculum. Was that the right one for me? Probably not, but it was a whole lot easier than all the other ones. So that's kind of the direction I went. But it kind of worked out for me because I ended up getting a public administration degree and a business degree and a real estate degree. So I guess the business did work out for me, but it was just by chance. But if I had a chance to go back and do it all over again, I'd probably focus on something that I really, really wanted to do. And I think at that time, I just didn't know. So like I said, when you're 18 years old, it's kind of hard to decide what you want to do in life. So the third phase, now you get to third phase and you've done your high school and you're going to college, or you're not going to college. You could be going to a vocational school. You could be on the job training. You could be a plumber. I know plumbers and people who work on air conditioners make more money than me. So, it's about that, what you want to do in life and dedication. Once you decide what you want to do, then be the best there is at what you want to do. So the advice to Ezra is, pay attention. Just life is short. I'm now 76 years old. I didn't think I'd live this long, but it has gone fast, really fast. I'm not going to say what age you are, but I can't believe that you're your age now. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can remember when you were a little boy. Life goes fast. You may not think so when you're young, but when you get past 30, it seems like it speeds up. 40 goes twice as fast. 50, it's zooming. When you get to be my age, it's like being in a Tesla and hitting the gas pedal, full blast. It's like, we just had Christmas. What do you mean it's Christmas already? So I'm starting my Christmas shopping now because it'll come fast.